Hello, and welcome back to So You Want to Be That Girl. I'm your host, Shadeen, and today is our first episode of season 2, which was supposed to come out a week ago, but it didn't. And I have a valid reason why. Not a great one, but it's valid. My 15-year-old cat, Ringo, sadly passed away. And then the day after, my other cat, Augie, had a seizure. Not related, okay? Not related. But I was on seizure watch, wanted to make sure she was doing okay. But anyway, we're not going to talk about that today because that's a topic for another episode, like a grieving one. But today, we're going to be talking about trends, okay? As we are all so well aware of, trends are everywhere. They are unavoidable. But what if I were to tell you that there is a psychological and biological reasoning behind why we all feel so compelled to follow trends? Yeah. And what if I were to tell you that the trends that we see today are the product of a very particular time in history? Yeah, that's right. It's time for school. So today we're going to get technical with trends, okay? We're going to dissect why we follow them on a psychological level, exploring the history of trends to understand how we got to where we are today with trends. But if you're saying, oh, that's so boring, and maybe you're feeling the urge to skip this episode, please give me a chance, okay? And I'll explain why you should hear me out. Have you ever done something that feels so unlike you, like so out of character, and maybe you've given yourself grief for that action? Or maybe you've seen your friends or a random stranger doing something that's just, they do something because it's cool, even if it may seem morally or fundamentally wrong. And you might feel frustrated or even resentment towards them. It is so important to understand why we do the things that we do, because a lot of the time we think our own willpower and strength is enough to overcome human nature. And you know what? Maybe it is, okay? But how are you supposed to overcome human nature if you don't understand it? You can't make conscious efforts to go against human nature if you don't even know what's happening in the first place. Understanding why we follow the crowd, why we feel compelled to follow trends is more than just us being weak or unoriginal. It's deeper than that. There's valid and scientifically proven, I'm getting passionate for no reason here, psychological and biological reasoning behind it. Understanding the why, will not only make you aware of your own actions and help you circumnavigate that if that's your goal, but it'll also make you more understanding of your neighbor, of your friends, of the people you might have been assuming were sheep, okay? You become more empathetic towards yourself and others. And is that not what life is all about? I mean, you're trying to be the best person you can be. And not only understanding the science, but the history. To be honest, in school growing up, history was like my least favorite subject. I mean, I just never really understood why we should care about the past when we're living in the present and looking towards the future. But now that I'm older, okay, now that my brain is no longer smooth, and believe it or not, she's fully developed, I think it's so important to understand history. Humans are complicated, but for the most part, we're predictable. And we really are so fortunate to live in a time where we have millennia of documented history, cultures, trends, and livelihoods. And why are we so fortunate? We've been doing the same stuff, just in different timelines. Some of the stuff we've done is horrible and bad. And knowing what we've done and learning from those mistakes, learning from our failures, is what keeps us from preventing the same mistakes again and again. Preventing or repeating? Repeating the same mistakes again and again, right? We have incredible opportunities to progress and better ourselves instead of regressing. But we can only do that if we make the effort and take the time to learn from them. So yes, it may seem boring at first, but it's important for our growth and understanding. And isn't that what being that girl is? Actively learning and educating ourselves to be the best versions of ourselves for the sake of living a happy and fulfilling life. I mean, I would say so. And I said it before and I'll say it again. Being that girl is being informed. But don't worry, okay? Once we cover this episode and lay the groundwork, next week will be all about modern trends, the ones that we love and we hate today, and how social media shapes trends, examples of current trends, so on and so forth. So sit back, relax, get a beverage of your choice, run an errand, drive to work, drive home from work, do some chores, do whatever you want to get in the podcast headspace, okay? And let's begin. So, what is a trend, first and foremost? According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, thank you, Merriam, a trend is a prevailing tendency or inclination, a general movement, or a current style or preference. For today's episode, we're going to specifically talk about societal trends. And what a societal trend refers to, it's the general direction and evolution of society's behaviors and attitudes, influenced by a number of factors like demographics, social norms, cultural practices, economic conditions, and even government policies. Essentially, though, from here on out, when I'm referencing trends today, the general idea is when someone or some group comes up with a certain style, behavior, livelihood, aesthetic, people follow, and it eventually gains momentum, bada bing, bada boom, or viral. Okay? The trends we're also going to be focusing on are, for the most part, more surface level, for a lack of better words. So, appearance and lifestyle oriented. Think fashion, beauty, and lifestyle trends. We're not going to really be covering social activism or justice just because that's something that, in my opinion, would require several more episodes and there's a lot more nuance to it, you know? So, for examples of trends, very briefly, of what I'd be referring to, think of like Y2K fashion, clean girl aesthetic, the rise of surgery, like plastic surgery, filler, Botox, diet trends like veganism, carnivore diet, keto, winter arc, 75 hard, you know? And by including these, don't assume that I'm going to hate on all of them, whatever. They're just trends that are people have talked about to me, that people have submitted on the podcast Instagram. And we'll get more into those next week and in upcoming episodes as well. But now that we've kind of set the standard as to what a trend is, we're going to look at the science first behind why we as humans feel so strongly to follow trends. And then we'll follow that with the history that led us to the modern trends we see today. There are a few psychological and biological reasons as to why society creates and perpetuates trends. First and foremost, let's talk psychological, okay? We're going to start with social proof. Social proof is a psychological phenomenon in which people will copy or follow other people's behaviors to kind of reflect what's considered correct behavior, especially during times of uncertainty. I'll give you an example, okay? The other night, my partner and I were in the mood for cookies. It was movie night, movie Monday, needed a little sweet treat after barbecue ribs, you know. So we wanted to bake chocolate chip cookies. We knew what we wanted to bake, which type of cookie, but we're uncertain of which recipe to use. So what do? We don't own a cookbook, which might have been very helpful in this situation. We just Googled it, and we looked at the recipe that had the most reviews and the highest ratings. So with that being said, say that you find a recipe that's like 500 reviews, 4.9 stars. Wouldn't you go to that one rather than one that's like 3 reviews and 5 stars or 10 reviews and 4.7 stars? You know what I mean? That's a very easy example of social proof. And for another example, say that you're deciding between 3 dermatologists for your annual skin check, which you should be getting every year. I don't care how much sun exposure you get on a daily basis. I don't care the color of your skin. You need to be checking your skin every year at a licensed and qualified dermatologist, okay? We don't do skin cancer. No. Sponsored by Big Sunscreen. Anyway, these 3 dermatologists, they're all equal distances from you. The copay or the cost to go would be the same. So really the only thing that you're looking at is reviews, and credibility. Chances are you're going to be going for the dermatologist with the highest ratings and maybe the most certifications. So say you live in, wow, I really can't think of a single place. Say you live in Cincinnati, Ohio, okay? If you see a dermatologist that's like certified best dermatologist in Cincinnati for the last 5 years, you're going to be impressed, are you not? I would be. So you're more inclined to go to them, you know? So that's what social proof is, okay? And to dive deeper, there's another psychological phenomenon. It's a subset of social proof called the bandwagon effect. You've probably heard of this, you know, joining the bandwagon, hopping on the bandwagon. But what is it? The bandwagon effect is when people do something primarily because the majority of people are doing it, regardless of your own morals or beliefs. I'll give another example, okay? Does anyone remember? Oh my God, this is so embarrassing. The 2017/2018 Dino Stomper white Fila's. If you don't know what I mean, thank God. Oh, they were not cute, but I fell victim. I didn't love them from the start, I'll be honest. I thought they were bulky and obnoxious, but what did I do? I went to Costco and I got them for $40. What a deal! And I wore them because all of my friends were doing it. All of the cool people I thought were cool were doing it. And I'm not one to really hop on trends, not because I'm above anyone else, but because I'm not exactly financially stable, as the average person would put it. Okay, I didn't have money to be throwing around for trends. Anyway, I hopped on. And what happened a couple months later? The trend fell off. And what did I do? I donated them. I wasted $40. And I didn't even like it in the first place. But why? Why would I do that? Because I was hopping on the bandwagon. I did something because the majority was also doing that. And I kind of ignored my own beliefs. I just hopped on that bandwagon. That's what we do. Like social proof, bandwagon effect means you look to other people to influence your next action. These two seem very similar. Once again, social proof is the original thing. Bandwagon is a subset. So let me break it down a little bit further to kind of explain how they're different. When experiencing social proof, we are more inclined to take into account a wider range of influencing factors when helping to make us a decision. That was kind of botched, wouldn't you say? Let me start over. When experiencing social proof, we're more inclined to take into account a wider range of influencing factors, including expertise, authority, and popularity, and that will altogether help us make a decision. On the other hand, when experiencing the bandwagon effect, we are more likely to make a decision based purely on the number of people doing the same thing in hopes to find a sense of belonging within a crowd and not missing out. So not necessarily taking into account the credibility of people all the time, Essentially, when someone is experiencing social proof, they are typically making a more conscious decision based on the influencing party's experience, authority, or credibility. And yeah, it may not always work out in our favor, but at that moment, we're making a judgment based on the help of a source we think is more certain of the outcome when we aren't sure, And the bandwagon effect is kind of taking it a step further. So we still look to others to help guide our decision making, but our sources just may be less credible. Instead of looking purely to experts or people who've been in similar situations, we look to the majority and follow the overall crowd so we don't face judgment or miss out on anything, even if at times that means ignoring our gut feelings or personal morals or beliefs. So, yeah, these two social phenomenon give us a sense of belonging. And as social creatures, we crave that feeling. Whether you think so or not, that's just how we are built, It's psychological. But the reason we follow trends isn't purely psychological, okay? We've got some biological components. What am I talking about? Dopamine production. You know what dopamine is. You've heard of it. You've heard of that dopamine cleanse trend that was going on a few years ago, I think. I don't know. That's a whole other conversation. But what is dopamine? What is it? Dopamine primarily acts as a neurotransmitter and then secondarily as a hormone. And I'll break down what that means. A neurotransmitter, if you don't know, is a chemical messenger that gives messages from your brain's nerve cells to the rest of your body. So neuro means nerves, transmitter means something that sends something, okay? That's like the actual word's meaning. Neurotransmitters act rapidly and locally within the nervous system, while hormones are more like long-term processes across the body, okay? For now, we're just going to be talking about how dopamine acts as a neurotransmitter, though, so keep that in mind, okay? Dopamine, I've said that word so many times already, I'm so sorry. Dopamine is known as the feel-good neurotransmitter. When you take part or experience something that ends with you feeling happy, satisfied, pleased, accomplished, euphoric, whatever, that feeling is because dopamine, that neurotransmitter, was produced and sent through your nervous system, okay? And speaking from an evolutionary standpoint, our body uses dopamine to reward and reinforce actions that traditionally aided in our survival. Eating, drinking, competing with others, doing something socially acceptable, having sex, reproduction. And when we do something that's considered socially acceptable, like in modern times, following a trend or getting recognition through social media likes, dopamine, believe it or not, is released because we did something that other people enjoyed. Going back to that evolutionary basis, being socially accepted means little threat to our livelihoods. Am I wrong? When we do something others like, we survive another day. And our body rewards us through dopamine. We feel rewarded through social recognition and following because we are literally chemically hardwired to do so. And you may be thinking, well, if we're getting dopamine from social media or trends or validation, why would we stop? Like, why would we ever stop seeking validation? We are literally feeling good from this. Here's why. Relying on external sources of validation for dopamine production can be dangerous. I'm not saying you're going to have a heart attack and keel over, okay? Hear me out. While dopamine isn't technically chemically addictive in the same way like nicotine is, it's directly responsible for pleasure and reward within ourselves. Because of that, we're always seeking out ways to get those feelings of euphoria, satisfaction, and happiness. And once we figure out a way to do so, we as humans have a habit of taking it a bit too far. Once you realize, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that dopamine is produced when we get a certain number of likes on social media, when someone calls you pretty, when you dress a certain way that draws attention, you're going to keep pursuing that to keep those dopamine hits coming, right? But here's the issue. Trends change. If your Instagram photo doesn't get as many likes as what you're used to, you're not going to get that dopamine spike you were expecting. If you're no longer matching the current trends and maybe you're not receiving the same validation you were used to before, you could experience overwhelming anxiety and shame and rejection. And honestly, your body might even go into flight or fight mode due to other neurotransmitters being released, like epinephrine or bear with me here. Norepinephrine. Yeah, that's good enough, right? Those neurotransmitters, also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline, lead to things like increased heart rate, cold sweats, and an overall feeling of fear. They can impact your sleep schedule, your mood, how you self-regulate and soothe yourself. I've been there, okay? I'll give you I love giving examples. Ooh, okay. To give an example, I had, like 10 years ago, I had my Instagram account, and I had like 1,000 followers, which for me now, that's a lot. But back then I was like, oh, I need more, even though I didn't know over half the people who were following me. Yeah, I had my friends and my family, whatever, like school acquaintances, but I'd have random followers. I did not know their first name, what they look like, whatever. And my posts, like whenever I post a photo, I wasn't using social media how it was intended to be used. I wasn't updating my friends or my family. I was just trying to post photos to get likes, to receive validation. And when I didn't get the number of likes I was expecting, or when I lost a follower, I don't know who you are, it would make me feel so anxious and nervous and like, is it me? Do I look bad in this photo? Was the filter no good? You know, like I was basing my worth off of that. So what did I do? I deleted my Instagram. I waited a few years and then I got it back, or I made a new one. I made it private, and now I only have 400 followers, if that, and which to me is still a lot. I probably have to go through and thin it out a little bit at this point. I don't know. But for the most part, they're friends and family, and yeah, maybe some school acquaintances I don't really talk to anymore, but it's nice to keep up, you know? And now when I post, I feel like all the comments are really nice to read and go through because they're my friends, you know? They're interacting with me like, oh, that looks so fun. I hope you had a great time. It's good now, you know? And I'm not getting those like really high dopamine spikes and then those really low periods of anxiety. Thanks, dopamine. Anyway, there are also healthy ways to seek out dopamine, okay? And the other methods, I'll give some examples, are healthier because they're low risk. They could release other positive chemicals like endorphins. They can lead to deepening relationships, provide secondary health benefits, and at the end of the day, not relying on the opinion of others. So, brief examples, we'll get into this later on. like next episode, but pursuing creative outlets, eating nutrient-dense foods, meditation, having sex. When I say this, I'm talking having safe and consensual, responsible sex with someone you trust in a consensual relationship, however that looks for you. Okay, don't be going off and putting yourself in danger. You know what I mean? You know what I'm getting at here. You could also, like laughing, sunlight, traveling, playing sports, all great examples. All right? Anyway, moving on. Another biological reason that we follow trends, the need for novelty. Our brain is hardwired to want new, fresh things because of, I'll give you a chance to guess. No, take a guess. It's dopamine. Oh, well, who would have thought? Dopamine production. When we experience new things or buy new things, our body also releases dopamine. And why does our body release dopamine in response to novelty? Dopamine, oh my God, I say that word so many times, sorry. Dopamine, as we talked about before, is released to reward our actions. And when we take a risk to try a new activity, explore a new place, be faced with something unusual to us, dopamine is released to facilitate the learning and help with memory formation. And without dopamine rewarding us to try new things, we would never feel inclined to explore, to learn, to adapt. But, thank you, dopamine, with your help, we feel motivated to pursue and learn from new experiences, which is, going back to that evolutionary basis, is and was vital in our survival and growth. When a new trend comes out, we feel motivated to hop on or buy the newest, hottest thing because, once again, we're hardwired to feel rewarded when doing so. But eventually, we get tired of the same old because dopamine is no longer being produced. We get used to it. Novelty turns into the mundane, and then we repeat the cycle until the next trend comes out, you know? And with trends being so fast-paced now, like instantaneous, we're getting huge spikes of dopamine followed by crashes, okay? You can feel fatigued, burnt out, and craving that high again. So you're stuck in the trend cycle. It's exhausting. Dopamine crashes are often associated with drug use. You've probably heard about that. And the crashes, along with the withdrawal, in general, keep people coming back for another hit. Now you know why people call social media a drug. All right? Also think of like a sugar high. Eat a lot of sugar, top of the moon, life is great, and then it all comes crashing down and you're grumpy. All right? That's what happens. Now that we've dissected why we follow trends on a biological and psychological level, we got to talk about another influencing factor in trends. Believe it or not, there are periods of human history that played pivotal roles in the formation of modern trends. Trends quite literally have been around since forever. I'm talking BCE, baby, back in time. And to prove that, let us very briefly, I'm going to keep it brief, explore trends within ancient Greece, particularly the archaic period in Greece. Think like 8th century to 480 BCE. And why are we talking about ancient Greece? Because it's one of the most universally known cultures, and I need an easily digestible example on here. Okay, bear with me. Also, I was obsessed with Greek mythology when I was in elementary school. I will forever find excuses to bring it up. My Percy Jackson girls. You get me. I don't need to explain myself. I think we all have a general idea of what Grecians wore in ancient times, right? You know, like a white or cream toga, quote-unquote toga, some gold accessories and sandals, yeah? It goes deeper, okay? What clothing and accessories people wore and what beauty practices people showcased back then were all based on their environment, resources, religion, culture, gender, and social status. And many of us would say ancient Grecians wore quote-unquote togas and that they all look the same, right? No. Men and women wore different styles of garments, different lengths. The colors of fabric and details were distinctive of region, of city, social class, so on. There were trends in fashion. There were trends in clothing, accessorizing, and beauty based on a number of influencing factors. For example, women in the archaic period in Greece went back and forth between two styles of clothing, the peplos and, bear with me, the chiton/chiton. I looked it up. I mean, I could be wrong, but the British English version says chiton, American says chitin. If you are Greek and know, please correct me because I'm very curious. Anyway, the peplos and the chiton. I'm going to say chiton because I like that pronunciation better. There was other clothing, obviously, but once again, we're kind of on a time crunch here. I don't want to bore you. I'm trying to keep you in. We're going to go brief. So just these two, for example. Essentially, the peplos was a long, draping, rectangular piece of cloth worn by women, usually made of a heavier fabric like wool, and it had a distinct fold over at the top, pinned at the shoulders, most of the time sleeveless, and sometimes, but not always, belted at the waist. Eventually, that fell out of favor, and women began to wear the chiton, which was, I think, was usually a singular piece of lighter fabric made out of linen or silk, and it was oftentimes sewn up on the sides, sewn or sometimes pinned on the shoulders, almost always belted. It could have sleeves, and surprisingly enough, originally worn by men. The reason why it originally fell out of favor is still up for debate. I don't know, but it could be that the many pins used in the peplos are also used in a murder. I don't know, though. You didn't hear it from me. My sources are conflicting. I don't know. Anyway, these two styles would go back and forth as to which was in and which was out due to a number of reasons. For example, at one period, the chiton lost favor to the peplos due to the Persian Wars, but then the peplos came back due to a statue of the goddess Athena, my girl, wearing a particular type of peplos, but then it lost favor again and so on and so forth, Yeah. Trends this far back in history were still considered trends because they were influenced by the culture, policies, environment, social status, gender, etc. Over hundreds of years, the fashion and beauty trends would shift due to the introduction of new art forms, continuous development and pride within particular cities, like Spartan fashion versus Athens fashion, new fabric and cultural influences courtesy of other nations, from trade routes or even war, But these trends are very different from the trends that we think of today because they were so slow compared to the instantaneous, fast-paced trends we know now. But they were trends nonetheless. So trends have been around since the dawn of time. But there was a very, very specific time period in history that, in a way, acted as a catalyst for the trends that we know today. I'm talking about the Industrial Revolutions. There were 4 Industrial Revolutions, but right now I'm just going to be talking about the first and the second and kind of mash them together into one big, influential, general time period. I will talk about the third one at the end of the episode, also called the Digital Revolution. But for now, I'm just going to be talking about the impact of the first 2. And I'm not even going to touch the fourth. Okay, that is so new. We're in it right now. And it's not necessarily relevant to the topic today. So anyway, many nations underwent the Industrial Revolutions at different times. They started in the West and then moved to the East. And they kind of occurred during the 18th/19th century for Western nations and 19th and 20th for many Eastern nations. So to put that into numbers, think 1700s to early 1900s globally. And they marked a period of just incredible technological advancements, innovations, significant societal changes, and ultimately the start of large-scale trends. And I know, you're probably thinking, what the hell does the Industrial Revolution, I cannot say that word. I don't know if you knew this, but I have a lisp, and I'm a little bit nervous. I'm shy. So having a bit of a hard time with dry mouth, cotton mouth, whatever they call it, and my lisp. Let me try it again. Industrial Revolution. Anyway, what does it have to do with the holy fucking airball, the clean girl trend? I know. I hear you, but it will come full circle. I promise. And I'm going to set the scene real quick. I'm going to set the scene for what life looked like prior to the revolutions, okay? Before the Industrial Revolutions, goods and services were produced by artisans with specialized skills. So there was no Forever 21. There was Elizabeth that was nasty with the hand loom, okay? But she took forever for a single apron. But bless her soul, she worked hard. All processes to create a good or a service and all machines available at that time were powered by humans, animals, wood, and charcoal. So biomass energy sources, you know what I mean? So if you think that electric stovetops now are annoying, you wouldn't have lasted a day with a wood stove. And not only that, but production time was slow, and because these items were really time-consuming to make, they were limited, and populations were kept smaller due to the limited resources. Supply and demand, baby. But then came industrialization, okay? This time period saw a huge growth in technological advances. I mean, that and then new energy sources, yeah, and new opportunity for work. I'll give some examples. The new machinery, okay, you probably heard of this, the spinning jenny. The spinning jenny increased the efficiency of spinning yarn by allowing one person to spin multiple threads at once, you know? There's also the power loom. Sorry, Elizabeth, I know you were nasty with that hand loom, but we gotta move on. The power loom was a machine to weave fabric instead of, the hand loom. We also had new energy sources like fuels, coal, the steam engine, and eventually the combustion engine, electricity, petroleum, etc. We also had factory-based work. So factories would produce textiles. They produce iron and steel products, machines, household supplies, clothing, shoes, and even medical equipment. All right. There was new transportation, trains, cars, planes, and last but not least, new inventions. We had the light bulb. Why did I say it like that? We had the light bulb, telephone, radio, and then even in like the early 1900s, we got plastic. Controversial. But what impact did industrialization have as a whole? Because of industrialization, population size increased because there was an increase in resources. So, with the newfound large-scale mechanized agriculture, meant one farm could produce more food for more people. And increasing population meant people abandoned their farming practices due to being outworked by the bigger farms and moved to towns and cities to find work in factories. There was also quicker production time of a variety of goods because of the era's advancements and factories. Crazy. And with the large amount of people leaving, the rural agrarian life and moving into towns, that ultimately created urbanized societies. It also created shifts in political powers and even the creation of the working class. That being said, while we saw an increase in resources, an increase in population, and this new urbanized society, we lost the domestic system. And we did because families could no longer work from home. So, for example, farming, people were outworked, they had to leave, had to go to the factories. So, yeah, men were forced to work in factories, and that demanding work meant very minimal time with their families. And women, especially unmarried women, had to work too to make end meets, and they often found work as domestic servants. Child labor, this is still an issue today, but child labor was also running rampant during this time period, specifically within the textile industry. And this is sad, but the reason for that is because their hands were so small that they could work best with threading the machinery, And kids would work for like 16 hours a day for really minimal pay. And even though this job was equally as dangerous as a man's work, they were considered less skilled. Disheartening, I know. All in all, industrialization was great for the economy, don't get me wrong. It was great for the increased accessibility of goods and growing populations. But on the flip side of the coin, you also had dangerous working conditions, weakened family dynamics, crowded cities and towns, and ultimately pollution. You got poop in the river, all right? So now that we know what life was like before and during the revolutions, we can talk about after more. Specifically, how industrialization directly influenced the creation of the social trends due to two main things, okay? The first being, with new goods and services being produced for the masses in shorter amounts of time, a new era of mass production and consumerism was born. Okay, so you had new options and new materials, and people were shopping around for fashion and personal preferences rather than out of sheer necessity, The second thing was urbanization. Increased connectedness across populations, especially with moving to cities and advancements in communications, made people begin to define themselves by material possessions and purchasing power. This led to new types of social classes and hierarchies coming about, and new cultural norms and values were established that we just hadn't seen before. And by that, I mean traditional values like family-orientedness was replaced with new values like individualism and self-expression. And if you're thinking, wouldn't that mean people would be more individual? We wouldn't be as inclined to follow trends? No. There was still a community and camaraderie in individualism. For example, think of flapper culture in the US, where Women kind of strayed away from the traditional feminine clothing and adopted more boxy, masculine silhouettes to reject the standard for that time. So they were self-expressing, or they were they were they were expressing themselves. There we go. While also having that sense of community, you know? These two phenomena change the foundation of trends in a way. So instead of a trend coming about from the limited options provided by the immediate environment, or from purely religion, culture, gender, social status, and policies, or politics, whatever. I have a hiccup. Hold on. Okay, we're back. You now had the influences of businesses and fashion industry leaders and, surprisingly enough, personal preferences, what you liked. Now, moving on to more of like the 1900s or the 20th century, we're going to talk about the trend cycle of that time period. During this time, the sources of media included newspapers, magazines, billboard advertisements, radios, catalogs, storefronts, and eventually television. The drivers of that time weren't social media influencers like we know today. They were major brands or designers like Chanel, Gucci, Saint Laurent. I guess use those because those are pretty like internationally known. You know, it's not like a local thing. Anyway, before this time, trends would change or shift or even disappear over the course of 50 to 100 years, 50 to hundreds of years, you know. But in the 1990s, it was more common for trends to last for 10 years, maybe even 20. So think of like decades fashion, okay? The 70s, at least in the US, yeah, the 70s were hippie vibes of long straight hair, minimalist makeup, earth tones, leathers. You also had at the 70s the disco, so like the flare bottoms, the fluffy hair, platform shoes, quote unquote happier colors. This 10 to 20 year life cycle of a trend was very distinctive, and we now call that slow fashion. And for the sake of just talking about it while we're here, it can be broken down into 5 phases. You have the introduction, where the trend is introduced by, I don't know, big fashion, like a fashion style, color palette, makeup, hair, general aesthetic, you know. Then you have the rise, spreading from the runway to storefronts, gaining traction in the media. Celebrities are seen wearing them. And then the peak, woo. Most major retailers at this point are showcasing the trend. The items for the trend are highly accessible. The prices in the stores are typically lower than while it was rising. And at this point, most luxury brands are beginning to move on. And then we have the decline. So the trend fatigue starts to set in. The trend becomes too mainstream. People are beginning to look elsewhere. And any kind of item or clothing associated with that trend is heavily discounted at retailers. And then we have its death. The trend is labeled out of fashion. A new trend is taking the stage. We're repeating, okay? But that takes about 10 to 20 years back then. Now, that could happen in like a week. It's crazy how fast it's been now. And now we're at the third industrial revolution. Starting in the mid-1900s, 1947 in particular, we started the information age, or the digital age, or the computer age. And okay, this is kind of going over my head at this point. Like, I'm so bad with technology. But what happened was the transistor, which is a tiny, tiny semiconductor device, don't know what that means, I don't know, changed how electrical signals were amplified or switched. Once again, over my head. But essentially, what you need to know is the transistor was the basis, or is the basis, of modern electronics. And eventually, after that point, fiber optics and microprocessors were created. And next thing you know, we got major television networks, we got the internet, email, and social media. And that's it. Oh my God, and that's it. See, was that so bad? No, hopefully you learned something today. And if you didn't, let me know. Also, as always, the resources I use in the episode are in the description, so feel free to check them out, do your own research. If I said anything wrong, or if you want to correct my pronunciation of chitin, please let me know. I want to learn too. Anyway, new episodes every Wednesday. Next week's episode will be all about modern trends, about social media's influence on trends, and how to break out of the trend cycle. Anyway, follow our Instagram for updates if you want, and we ask questions to you on there that we'll cover in the episodes. Quick plug at So You Want to Be That Girl. Anyway, yeah, I'm gonna go drink some water and hang out. Yeah, I love you guys. Ooh, I love you guys. I love you guys. I love you guys. Starting to sound like a threat. Anyway, I'll see you next week. Talk to you then. Until then, stay safe. All right, love you. Bye.